I wasn't looking for another woman. That's the first thing you should know. The last one had hollowed me out, taken the parts of me that knew how to trust, and packed them in her suitcase when she left. So when I took the job as a personal secretary for the reclusive author Anya Sterling, my only intention was to disappear. Her house, a severe modernist structure of glass and gray stone nestled deep in a forest 3 hours from the nearest city, seemed like the perfect place for a ghost to haunt. I needed the quiet. I needed the paycheck. Most of all, I needed a life so devoid of emotional complication that my heart, a bruised and skittish thing, could finally stop flinching at shadows. The house itself was a fortress of solitude. Towering bookshelves lined every wall, a silent army of spines standing guard. The air smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and something else, something faintly spicy and warm, like sandalwood, that I would soon learn was the scent that clung to Miss Sterling herself. Our first meeting was brief, almost surgically precise. She was taller than I'd expected from her author photos, with a cascade of silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a severe knot. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, assessed me with an unnerving stillness. She didn't smile. "You're a Lara," she stated, her voice a low, melodious contralto that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Ms. Sterling. Your references are impeccable. Your predecessor was effusive." "I do not like effusive people," she gestured to a small, immaculate desk in an alcove overlooking the dense woods. "This will be your space. Your tasks are outlined in the folio. My schedule is on the tablet. I take coffee at 8 black. Lunch is at 1, something simple. I work in my study from 9 until 6. Do not disturb me unless the house is on fire." And that was it. My orientation. For the first 2 weeks, our interactions were limited to these sterile exchanges. I'd place her coffee on the small table outside her study door, a heavy slab of oak that remained resolutely shut. I'd retrieve the empty cup an hour later. I organized her correspondence, digitized her old research notes, and fielded calls from her agent, a man with a perpetually frantic voice. I was a cog in a well-oiled machine, and Anya Sterling was the ghost in it. I saw her only in glimpses, a flash of her crossing the cavernous main living area, a silhouette in the window of her study as dusk fell. It was exactly the kind of emotional desert I'd craved. There was no room for connection, no chance for the kind of messy entanglement that had ruined me. My life was reduced to a series of tasks, a quiet rhythm of keystrokes and the soft rustle of paper. At 5 o'clock each day, I would pack my bag, drive the 20 minutes to my small rented cottage, and spend the evening trying not to think about Sarah. Trying not to remember the way her laughter used to fill a room before it became a weapon, the way her hand felt in mine before it learned to push me away. I was safe here. Guarded. The imposing, silent woman in the study was just my employer. A paycheck. A means to an end. Her world was one of ink and ideas, and mine was one of invoices and calendar alerts. The walls between us were as solid and clear as the vast panes of glass that made up her home. I convinced myself I was content with this arrangement. I told myself that the faint, lonely ache in my chest was just the echo of a past hurt, not the pang of a current emptiness. I was healing, I thought. I was building myself back up, one sterile, silent day at a time. I had no idea that the foundation I was laying was on a fault line, and the woman behind the oak door was the tectonic shift I never saw coming. The first crack in the facade appeared during my 3rd week. I was sorting through a box of archived materials, old manuscripts, faded photographs, letters tied with brittle ribbon. My instructions were clear: scan, label, file. But my curiosity got the better of me. I untied one of the bundles. The letters were from another writer, a poet I recognized, and they were filled with a passionate, almost desperate, intellectual fervor. They debated philosophy, dissected novels, and flirted through literary analysis. At the bottom of the box, I found a photograph. A much younger Anya Sterling, her hair dark and wild, was laughing, her head thrown back in genuine, uninhibited joy. She was standing next to another woman, their arms slung around each other's shoulders, a shared light in their eyes. It was a startling image, so at odds with the severe, monastic woman I worked for. I felt a strange pang, a flicker of something I couldn't name. It felt like an intrusion, like I had stumbled upon a secret not meant for me. I quickly scanned the photo, labeled it A. Sterling, circa 1990s, and filed it away, the ghost of her laughter echoing in the silent house. The professional distance I had so carefully cultivated felt suddenly porous. I had seen a glimpse of the woman, not the author, and it unsettled me. That afternoon, when I brought her a folder of documents requiring her signature, she actually opened the study door instead of just taking them from the pass-through slot. For a moment, she just looked at me. Her gray eyes seemed to see more than I was comfortable with. "Is there a problem, Alara?" "No, Ms. Sterling. Just these contracts from your publisher." Her gaze flickered down to the folder, then back to my face. A bead of silence stretched, thick with the unspoken. "You are quiet," she observed. It wasn't an accusation, but it felt like one. "It's a quiet house," my answer was a deflection, a retreat. A corner of her mouth quirked, a barely there movement that wasn't quite a smile. "It is. I pay a premium for it." She took the folder, and her fingers brushed mine. It was nothing, a flicker of contact, but a jolt went through me, sharp and unexpected. Her skin was cool, smooth. I pulled my hand back as if I'd touched a live wire. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, surprise. Curiosity, before she retreated back into her sanctuary, the heavy oak door clicking shut, leaving me alone in the hallway with the sudden, frantic beat of my own heart. I retreated to my desk, my hands trembling slightly. It was just static electricity, I told myself. A side effect of the dry air in the climate-controlled house. But I knew it was a lie. It was the same jolt I'd felt the first time Sarah had taken my hand across a cafe table, a spark of recognition my body understood long before my brain caught up. I hated it. I hated the feeling, the vulnerability it represented. I had come here to be numb, and this woman, with her silent house and her ghost of a smile, was threatening to make me feel again. And that was a danger I couldn't afford. The walls I'd built around my heart were not just for show, they were load-bearing, and I was terrified of what would happen if they started to crumble. The dynamic began to shift after that, in increments so small I could almost pretend they weren't happening. Ms. Sterling, Anya, as she eventually insisted I call her when we were alone, started leaving her study door ajar. Just a crack, but it was enough to let the low murmur of classical music drift out, to let me hear the soft scratch of her fountain pen on paper. It felt like an invitation, or perhaps a test. I never breached the threshold, but the open door changed the atmosphere of the house. It was no longer two separate orbits but a shared space. She began to ask my opinion on things. Trivial matters, at first. Which of these cover designs has more gravitas, Alara, or does this turn of phrase sound pretentious to you? I would answer professionally, keeping my feedback concise and objective. But inside, a quiet war was raging. The part of me that had been an English literature major, the part that had once dreamed of a life surrounded by books and ideas, was thrilled. It was the part of me Sarah had belittled, calling my passions quaint and unprofitable. Anya, however, listened to my thoughts with a focused intensity that was both unnerving and deeply validating. She would nod slowly, her gray eyes fixed on mine, making me feel as though my words had actual weight. "You have a good ear," she said one afternoon, after I'd helped her untangle a particularly convoluted sentence. The simple praise landed in my chest with a warmth that spread through my limbs. It was so different from the effusive, empty compliments Sarah used to give, which were always a prelude to asking for something. Anya's praise was economical and sincere. It felt earned. My observations of her became more detailed, more personal. I learned the subtle shifts in her posture that signaled a good writing day. I noticed she had a habit of tucking a stray silver strand of hair behind her ear when she was deep in thought, a gesture that was unconsciously graceful. I memorized the scent of her, the ever-present sandalwood and paper, but also the faint, clean smell of the soap she used, and sometimes, the earthy aroma of fresh soil from her trips to the small greenhouse at the back of the property. These details became lodged in my mind, small, intimate facts that felt illicit to know. I was her employee. This level of awareness felt like a transgression. It felt like desire. And that terrified me. The attraction I felt was a quiet, insidious thing, a vine creeping over the walls I'd built. It wasn't the fiery, chaotic pull I'd had with Sarah. This was quieter, deeper. It was an attraction to her mind, to her stillness, to the unexpected kindness that occasionally broke through her reserved exterior. It was the way she'd leave a first edition of a book she thought I'd like on my desk without comment, or the time she noticed me shivering, and a soft cashmere blanket appeared on the back of my chair the next morning. These small, silent gestures of care were more potent than any grand declaration. They were whispers in a language I had almost forgotten how to speak. The first snow of the season came without warning, a thick, wet blanket that fell fast and heavy. The forecast had predicted a dusting, but by mid-afternoon, the world outside the glass walls of the house had been erased, replaced by a swirling vortex of white. The long, winding driveway that led to the main road was gone. The plows won't get up here until morning, if we're lucky, Anya said, standing by the vast window in the living area, a porcelain mug cradled in her long fingers. She wasn't looking at me, but I knew the statement was for my benefit. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at me. My car will be a large, useless sculpture until tomorrow, she finished, her tone matter-of-fact. She finally turned to look at me, her expression unreadable. You'll have to stay. I'll have the guest room prepared. Forced proximity. The oldest trope in the book. My mind screamed at the cliché, at the sheer, terrible inevitability of it. Being trapped in this silent, charged house with her overnight felt like being locked in a cage with a very elegant, very dangerous tiger. My carefully constructed professional distance was about to be obliterated by a snowstorm. I don't have anything with me, I stammered, the excuse flimsy even to my own ears. I'm sure we can find you a toothbrush. As for clothes, I have a few things that might suffice, she gestured vaguely towards the hallway. The guest room is the second door on the left. Make yourself at home. Making myself at home was the last thing I could possibly do. The guest room was beautiful and impersonal, decorated in muted tones of gray and cream. Laid out on the bed was a pair of soft gray sweatpants, and a simple black t-shirt. They were her clothes. The thought of wearing them, of having the fabric that had been close to her skin against mine, sent a dizzying rush of heat through me. I touched the t-shirt. It was impossibly soft and smelled faintly of her, of sandalwood and quiet strength. Putting it on felt like an act of profound intimacy, a surrender. Dinner was a quiet affair. Anya cooked, moving around her state-of-the-art kitchen with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing to watch. She made a simple pasta with a sauce from vegetables she'd grown in her greenhouse. We ate at the huge wooden dining table, the silence between us amplified by the howling of the wind outside. Are you all right, Alara? She asked, her voice cutting through the quiet. I'm fine. Just, not used to the quiet, it was a lie. I was used to the quiet. I wasn't used to this quiet, the kind that was so full of unspoken things it felt louder than a shout. My ex-wife hated it, she said, her voice casual, but the words hung in the air between us like smoke. Wife. The word landed like a stone in a still pond, the ripples spreading through me. I had seen the picture, of course, but this was confirmation. Concrete. It changed the texture of the air. She was a city person, Anya continued, pushing a piece of pasta around her plate. She said the silence out here wasn't empty, it was watchful. She felt like the trees were judging her. She looked up at me, a flicker of dry humor in her eyes. I told her she was projecting. I let out a small, involuntary laugh. I can see that. Can you? Her gaze was direct, searching. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. I mean, it's easy to fill a silence with your own fears. The words were out before I could stop them. It was the most honest thing I'd said to her, maybe the most honest thing I'd said to anyone in months. She held my gaze for a long moment, and the professional veil between us seemed to dissolve completely. I was no longer just her secretary. She was no longer just my boss. We were two women, trapped by a storm, sharing a meal and a sudden, unexpected moment of vulnerability. Yes, she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. It is. Later that evening, the power went out. The house was plunged into an abrupt, profound darkness, the only light coming from the weak glow of our phones and the swirling snow outside. The hum of the generator kicked in a moment later, powering a few emergency lights, but the central heating remained off. A deep, penetrating cold began to seep in through the glass walls. Anya was unflappable. The generator only powers the essentials. The fireplace is our best bet for heat. She built a fire with the same quiet competence she did everything else, the flames catching and roaring to life, casting dancing shadows across the cavernous room. We sat on the floor before it, wrapped in thick blankets. The house felt smaller, more intimate in the firelight. The vast, empty spaces were consumed by darkness, leaving only the small circle of warmth we occupied. "Tell me about your fears, Alara," she said, her voice a low murmur that barely rose above the crackling of the logs. The question was so direct, so disarming, that I didn't have a defense ready. The truth simply fell out. "I'm afraid of getting it wrong again," I whispered, the words tasting like rust in my mouth. "The last time, the last person I was with, she took everything. I let her." I didn't say Sarah's name. I didn't have to. The shape of the hurt was enough. I told her about the slow erosion of my confidence, the way my world had shrunk to fit inside her expectations, the final, brutal discard when she'd grown bored of me. I spoke into the firelight, not looking at Anya, but I could feel her stillness beside me, a solid, unwavering presence. I felt stripped bare, every scar and flaw exposed in the flickering light. I expected pity, or perhaps a polite, awkward silence. Instead, when I finally fell silent, my throat thick with unshed tears, she spoke. "The person you're describing wasn't taking from you, she was feeding on you. There's a difference." Her voice was devoid of sentimentality, a cool, clean assessment that cut through my shame. "It wasn't your fault that she was starving." I finally turned to look at her. Her face was half in shadow, her gray eyes reflecting the fire. She wasn't looking at me with pity. She was looking at me with a kind of fierce understanding that took my breath away. In that moment, she saw the wreckage Sarah had left behind, and she wasn't repulsed by it. She was simply naming it. "My wife," she began, her voice quiet, "was a brilliant, beautiful woman. A supernova. But supernovas collapse. They become black holes. You can pour all the light you have into them, and they only get darker." She paused, tracing a line on the wooden floor with her finger. Loving her was like trying to warm my hands on a star. I just kept getting burned. It took me years to learn that some people are beautiful from a distance, but they will incinerate you if you get too close. The reciprocity of her confession was a gift. She had taken my fragile, ugly vulnerability, and matched it with her own. She was showing me her scars. The power imbalance that had defined our relationship, employer and employee, famous author and anonymous assistant, evaporated in the warmth of the fire. We were just two women who had been burned by love, sitting together in the dark. A log in the fire shifted, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. The cold was getting deeper. I shivered, pulling the blanket tighter around me. "The guest room will be an icebox by morning," Anya said, her voice practical again. "My bedroom is directly above the hearth. The residual heat will keep it warmer. There's more than enough space." The offer hung in the air, a terrifying, beautiful proposition. Bed sharing. Another cliché, but in that moment, it felt less like a trope and more like a lifeline. The thought of sleeping alone in a freezing cold room was miserable. But the thought of sleeping in her room, in her bed, it was a landscape of possibilities and fears I didn't know how to navigate. My fear must have shown on my face. It's a large bed, Alara, she said gently, a hint of wry amusement in her voice. I promise I don't bite. Unless you're a particularly vexing split infinitive. That small, dry joke was enough to break the tension. A real smile touched my lips. Okay, I whispered. Okay. Her bedroom was like the rest of the house, minimalist, elegant, and dominated by books. The bed was huge, a vast expanse of white linen. The air smelled more strongly of her here, a clean, intimate scent that made my nerves hum. We moved with a strange, formal choreography, changing into our sleeping clothes in the attached bathroom, avoiding looking at each other. It felt both deeply awkward and profoundly intimate. When we finally lay down, we were on opposite sides of the massive bed, a gulf of white linen between us. The only sound was the wind and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I lay stiff as a board, staring up at the dark ceiling, hyper-aware of her presence just a few feet away. I could feel the heat radiating from her body, hear the soft sound of her breathing. Every nerve in my body was on high alert. This was proximity of a different order. This was a new level of vulnerability. After an eternity of silence, her voice came out of the darkness. Alara. Yes. My voice was a strangled whisper. You don't have to be afraid of me. The simple statement undid me. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down my temple into my hair. It wasn't just about her. It was about everything. About Sarah. About my own broken instincts. About the terrifying hope that was beginning to bloom in my chest, a fragile green shoot pushing its way through rubble. I'm not, I lied, my voice thick. I felt more than saw her shift in the darkness. A moment later, her hand found mine in the space between us. Her fingers were cool, her grip gentle but firm. She didn't say anything else. She just held my hand, her thumb stroking softly over my knuckles. It wasn't a gesture of passion but of comfort. Of solidarity. A silent promise in the dark. And slowly, for the first time in a very long time, with my hand held safely in hers, I fell asleep. The next morning, the world was silent and white. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine, untouched landscape. I woke up first, disoriented for a moment before the reality of the situation came rushing back. I was in Anya Sterling's bed. Her hand was no longer holding mine, but we had moved closer in the night. I was facing her and her face, soft in sleep, was only inches from my own. The severe lines of her waking face were gone, replaced by a serene calm. Her silver-streaked hair was loose, fanned out across the pillow. I could see the faint, feathery lines at the corners of her eyes, the gentle curve of her mouth. She was beautiful. The thought was so clear, so undeniable, it felt like a physical blow. I watched her breathe for a long time, my own breath caught in my chest. This felt dangerous, like staring into the sun. I was seeing too much, feeling too much. The walls I had so painstakingly built were not just crumbling, they were gone, washed away by a snowstorm and a quiet confession in the dark. Gently, I slipped out of the bed and went to the window. The driveway was a smooth, uninterrupted drift of snow. We were still trapped. But the panic I'd felt yesterday was gone, replaced by a slow, simmering hum of something else. Anticipation. When Anya came downstairs an hour later, dressed in a soft, dark blue sweater, the awkwardness I'd feared didn't materialize. The intimacy of the night before had forged something new between us. The air was different, still quiet but charged with a new energy. The plow service said it could be this afternoon, maybe even tomorrow, she said, pouring coffee. She handed me a mug, her fingers brushing mine. This time, I didn't pull away. I let the warmth of her touch linger for a second too long. Our eyes met over the rims of our mugs, and a silent conversation passed between us. We spent the day in a strange, domestic bubble. We cleared a path to the greenhouse to check on her plants. I helped her catalog a new shipment of research books. We worked in comfortable silence, the unspoken things from the night before hanging in the air, a tangible presence. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, was magnified, imbued with a significance that made my heart race. I was acutely aware of the space between our bodies at all times, when we stood side by side at the kitchen counter making sandwiches for lunch, when she leaned over my shoulder to point at a passage in a book, her hair brushing my cheek, the scent of sandalwood and her enveloping me. It was in the library, surrounded by her army of books, that the turn came. She was on a ladder, reaching for a book on a high shelf. "I can't quite reach it," she said, her voice strained. "Here, let me steady the ladder," I said, moving behind her and placing my hands on the wooden frame. I was standing directly behind her, my face level with the small of her back. She shifted her weight, and her hip brushed against my shoulder. The contact was electric. I could feel the warmth of her through her jeans, smell the clean scent of her skin. My breath hitched. She reached again, her fingers just grazing the spine of the book. Then she lost her footing slightly. She made a small sound of surprise and her hand came down, not to the ladder, but to my shoulder to steady herself. Her touch was firm, her palm warm against my collarbone. She looked down at me, her face just inches from mine. The world seemed to slow down. The dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunbeams froze. All I could see were her eyes, the color of a storm-tossed sea, wide with a surprise that mirrored my own. Her gaze dropped to my lips. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, wild bird. This was it. The moment where everything could change. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Her thumb brushed against the skin of my neck, a feather-light touch that sent a shiver down my entire body. I leaned in, an infinitesimal movement, a surrender. Her lips parted slightly. And then, the shrill, jarring ring of my cell phone shattered the moment. It was like a spell breaking. We both jumped back as if burned. I fumbled for the phone in my pocket, my hands shaking. The screen flashed, "Chloe. My sister." "I have to take this," I mumbled, not looking at Anya, and fled from the room, my face burning with a mixture of desire and embarrassment. I answered the phone in the cold hallway, my back pressed against the wall. "Hey. Ilara. Oh, thank God. I've been trying you. The news said your area got hit with a massive snowstorm. Are you okay? Are you stuck at that creepy author lady's house?" Chloe's voice was a whirlwind of frantic energy, a stark contrast to the quiet stillness I'd been living in. "I'm fine, Chloe. The power's out, but we're fine." "We?" Her voice sharpened. "You and her? Alone? Ilara, please tell me you're being careful." The implication was clear. Chloe had been the one who had scraped me off the floor after Sarah. She had seen the wreckage up close. "It's not like that," I said, the lie tasting sour. "Isn't it? It's always like that with you. You fall for these intense, brilliant women who end up eating you for breakfast. Remember Sarah? Remember how she convinced you to quit your PhD program because it was distracting you from her needs? This sterling woman, she sounds just like her type. Powerful, isolated, probably a world-class narcissist." Every word was a small, sharp stab. She was just trying to protect me, I knew that. But she was using my past to poison my present. She was describing Anya but seeing Sarah. And the worst part was, a small, terrified part of me was listening. What if she was right? What if this quiet kindness was just a more sophisticated trap? Anya was my boss. There was an inherent power imbalance. Was I just mistaking gratitude and professional admiration for something more? "She's not like that," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Just be careful, Elle. Your heart isn't a goddamn rental car you can just wreck and get a new one. I'm not sure you'd survive another 1 inch." We hung up, and I leaned my head back against the cold wall, my eyes closed. Chloe's words had resurrected all my ghosts. The fear I'd been holding at bay came roaring back, cold and overwhelming. The charged, beautiful moment in the library now seemed reckless, foolish. A mistake I was about to repeat. When I walked back into the library, the atmosphere was completely changed. Anya was standing by the window, her back to me, her arms crossed. The warmth and intimacy were gone, replaced by a cool, formal distance. She had retreated back into her shell, and I had been locked out. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Yes. My sister." She was just worried about the storm. The lie felt heavy and clumsy. "I see." We didn't speak of what had happened on the ladder. We pretended it didn't exist. The rest of the day passed in a strained, polite silence. The closeness we had found was gone, replaced by the chasm of my fear. I felt sick with regret. I had been on the precipice of something real, and I had let the ghosts of my past pull me back from the edge. By the time the plows finally cleared the road late the next morning, I couldn't wait to escape. The house no longer felt like a sanctuary, it felt like a monument to my own cowardice. I drove back to my cottage in a daze, the house and the woman in it receding in my rearview mirror. The next few days at work were excruciating. We were back to the beginning, Ms. Sterling and Alara. The study door was closed. The coffee was left on the table outside. The silence was no longer comfortable, it was heavy with unspoken words, with the ghost of a moment that had almost been. I was miserable. I had gotten what I thought I wanted, my solitude, my safety, and it felt like a punishment. The breaking point came a week later. I was working late, trying to distract myself with a tedious filing project, when Anya emerged from her study. She looked tired, her face pale in the dim light. She didn't say anything, just walked to the kitchen and came back with 2 glasses and a bottle of expensive-looking whiskey. She set one glass on my desk. "Drink this," she said. It wasn't a request. I stared at the amber liquid. "Ms. Sterling, Anya," she corrected, her voice firm. She sat in the chair opposite my desk, a clear breach of our unspoken professional boundaries. "We need to talk, Alara. This performance of polite distance is exhausting." She took a sip of her whiskey, her gray eyes fixed on me over the rim of the glass. "You've been terrified since that phone call. You're looking at me, but you're seeing someone else." Her directness was like a physical blow. There was nowhere to hide. "I don't know what you're talking about," I whispered, the denial weak. "Don't you?" She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low, intense register. "I know what it's like to have your past haunt your present. I know what it's like to be so afraid of being burned again that you'd rather live in the cold. I saw something in your eyes on that ladder. The same thing you saw in mine. And then it was gone. You retreated. I want to know why." The dam inside me finally broke. The fear, the yearning, the confusion, it all came pouring out. "Because I'm a fool." I cried, the words raw and painful. "Because every time I trust my heart with a woman, I end up broken. My sister was right. You're brilliant and powerful, and you're my boss, and this is a terrible, reckless idea. It's the same pattern, and I can't survive it again." Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and shameful. I had never let anyone see me this broken, not even Chloe. I buried my face in my hands, wanting to disappear. I heard her chair scrape as she stood up. I braced myself for her to leave, to retreat back to the safety of her study, disgusted by my messy, unprofessional outburst. Instead, I felt her hands gently take mine, pulling them away from my face. She knelt in front of me, so our eyes were level. Her expression was not one of pity or annoyance. It was one of infinite, heart-stopping tenderness. "Look at me, Alara," she commanded softly. I forced myself to meet her gaze. "I am not her. I am not your past. I am not a pattern. I am a woman who has been just as lonely and just as careful as you are. And yes, I am your boss, which complicates things. But it doesn't make what I feel for you any less real." Her thumbs stroked the backs of my hands, sending shivers through me. "What I feel," she continued, her voice a low murmur, is that you have a mind that fascinates me, a quiet strength that I admire, and a sadness in your eyes that I want to understand. I feel that when you smile, it's like the sun coming out after a week of rain. And I felt on that ladder that if I didn't kiss you, I might regret it for the rest of my life. Her confession hung in the air, a breathtaking, terrifying truth. She was laying it all bare. She was taking the ultimate risk. I'm scared, I whispered, the admission of final surrender. I know, she said, her voice impossibly gentle. So am I. And then she leaned in and kissed me. It was nothing like Sarah's kisses, which had always been demanding, a form of conquest. This was a question. It was soft, hesitant at first, a gentle pressure of her lips against mine. It tasted of whiskey and courage and a profound, bone-deep relief. I responded instinctively, my hands coming up to cup her face, my fingers tangling in her soft, silver-streaked hair. The kiss deepened, becoming more sure, more certain. It was a conversation without words, a mapping of lonely coastlines, a promise that we were both standing on solid ground. All the fear, all the ghosts, all the warnings dissolved in the simple, undeniable truth of her mouth on mine. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. She rested her forehead against mine, her eyes closed. "Ilara," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. The next morning was not awkward. It was quiet, but it was a new kind of quiet. A settled quiet. We woke up tangled together in her bed, the morning sun slanting across the sheets. For the first time, I didn't feel like an intruder in her space. I felt like I belonged there. We made breakfast together, moving around each other in an easy, new rhythm. The elephant in the room, our professional relationship, had to be addressed. As we sat at the kitchen table, nursing our coffee, I was the one who brought it up. "Anya," I began, my voice a little shaky. "What are we doing?" "I work for you." She reached across the table and took my hand, her grip warm and reassuring. "I know. And I will not put you in a position where you feel pressured or compromised. That is the last thing I want." She looked at me, her gaze serious and direct. "I was thinking about it all night. I've been wanting to hire a research manager for months, someone to oversee the archives and liaise with the university. It's a different position entirely. A senior role. You're more than qualified for it. It would mean we are colleagues, not this." She gestured between us, acknowledging the boss-secretary dynamic. It was a concrete plan. A specific, actionable solution. It wasn't a vague promise to figure it out, it was a demonstration of respect for me, for my career, and for the integrity of what was beginning between us. She was actively dismantling the power imbalance, creating a space where we could meet as equals. "I would like that," I said, my voice filled with a relief so profound it almost made me cry again. "I would like that very much." "Good," she said, a genuine, beautiful smile spreading across her face. The one I'd only seen in a faded photograph. Then it settled. We spent the rest of the day in a bubble of quiet discovery, talking for hours. I learned about her childhood, her disastrous first book, her passion for obscure medieval history. She learned about my abandoned dissertation on modernist poets, my love for hiking, my complicated relationship with my family. We were filling in the empty spaces, building a bridge between two solitary islands. That evening, as we sat by the fire, her arm around me, my head resting on her shoulder, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. The house was no longer a fortress of solitude, it was a sanctuary we had built together. The quiet was no longer empty, it was filled with the steady, comforting presence of her. I had come here to disappear, to become a ghost. Instead, in the quiet, watchful house of Anya Sterling, I had finally, truly been seen. My bruised heart, which I had guarded so fiercely, was tentatively, hopefully, beginning to beat again, in time with hers. Have you ever been so afraid of repeating a past mistake that you almost walked away from the one thing that could finally heal you? If our story has touched your heart, please give this video a like, subscribe for more tales of love and courage, and share your own experiences in the comments below.